Hello, and welcome to the final day of MinPost Festival, as we wrap up a full week of conversations on the ideas shaping civic and cultural life. I'm Tanner Curl, Executive Director of MinPost, a nonprofit, nonpartisan news organization serving Minnesotans with in-depth coverage of our state. For our last session of the festival, we're talking with Errin Haines and Emily Ramshaw, two leaders from the 19th, in conversation with MinPost Washington correspondent Ashley Hackett. First, I want to thank our MinPost Festival presenting sponsors, AT&T, Polad Companies, and the Shavlik Family Foundation, as well as our supporting sponsors Baird Private Wealth Management, Comcast Twin Cities, Frederickson and Byron, PA, and the Westminster Town Hall Forum. And our promoting sponsors, Citizens League, Darla Cashin at RBC Wealth Management, the Hubbard School of Journalism and Mass Communication at the University of Minnesota, the Humphrey School of Public Affairs at the University of Minnesota, and the Minneapolis-St. Paul International Film Festival. I also want to thank our VIP executive presenters, Ellen Archibald, Jim and Joy Erickson, Joel and Lori Kramer, and Karen Sternal and Lowell Pickett, as well as all of our VIP supporters, especially John and Linda Sartorius, for making this session possible. MinPost is a reader-supported nonprofit. If you already support our in-depth reporting, thank you. If not, please donate now at minpost.com/support. Any amount makes a difference and is crucial to our nonprofit newsroom. Go to minpost.com/support and thank you. And now for our conversation with Errin Haines and Emily Ramshaw, I'll turn it over to MinPost Washington correspondent Ashley Hackett.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to today's session, the final session in the MinPost Festival for this week. I'm here, as Tanner said, with Emily Ramshaw and Errin Haines, who are co-founders of the 19th, which is a nonprofit, nonpartisan newsroom founded in 2020 that's reporting at the intersection of gender, politics, and policy. So for a brief introduction of these two ladies, Errin Haines is the editor-at-large for the 19th. She's also a contributor to MSNBC. Previously, she was a national writer on race and ethnicity for the Associated Press. And Emily Ramshaw is the co-founder and CEO of the 19th. She was previously the editor-in-chief of the Texas Tribune. So these women set out to create a woman-focused nonprofit publication, and I'm really excited to speak to you both today. Real quick before we get started, as has been the case for the rest of our sessions this week, we will be doing a Q&A session at the end. And so if you want to submit a question for me to ask to these two ladies, you can go to the Q&A tab at the bottom of your screen. So with all that said, Errin and Emily, I'd really like to start off today just hearing from you about whoever had the big idea to set out and create this news organization that focuses on women. So what was that like, that first beginning process, and how did you know that it was going to work?
Well, I guess I'll kick us off. First off, I want to say thank you so much for having us. And as a longtime alum of the Texas Tribune, where I spent 11 years, like MinPost is like our, brothers and sisters in arms. So it's really fun for me after doing all the Texas Tribune Festival stuff for all those years to get to be here with you all for your festival. So I'll take you back. I think the idea for the 19th first came to me truly now about 5 years ago. It was when Hillary Clinton was lost to Donald Trump in the presidential election, and I was on maternity leave with a baby girl and had been looking at all these headlines around electability and likability for women candidates, which just seems sort of so fundamentally sexist. And in that moment, I thought, we need a new national newsroom of record that centers the lived experiences of women. We know that 2/3 of politics and policy reporters are men. Almost all of them are white. When you get into the editing ranks, it's even more male, even more white. And those are the people who are deciding what's news and what isn't, who's quoted and who isn't, whether those stories play on the front page or the home page. So I had this sort of epiphany, and then I went back to trying to keep another human being alive. And that idea just sort of like flew right out the other side of my head. And then 4 years later, we had more women on the 2020 trail than ever before, more women of color on the 2020 trail than ever before. And in that moment, I thought, my God, what have I been waiting for? This is the moment to do this. It was about to be the 100th anniversary of the centennial of the 19th Amendment. And then I'll turn it over to Errin, who I basically called and tried to beg to come on this journey with me and our co-founder, Amanda Zamora. So Errin, over to you.
Yeah, and thank you also so much for inviting us to be here and close out what I hope was an amazing week for your inaugural festival, but what I'm sure will not be the last. So congratulations to all of y'all, and thank you so much for having us. And it's good to be in conversation with you, Ashley, and to give me an excuse to share a screen, at least with my now boss, who nearly 2 years ago slid into my DMs on Twitter. And, we did not know each other before we became colleagues, but Emily reached out to me and laid out her vision for this newsroom, and really did that at a time when, I was frustrated on the 2020 Democratic primary campaign trail, covering a record 6 women running for office, covering the most diverse field of candidates that the Democratic Party had ever fielded. And yet, we were still seeing too many of the same kind of tired narratives around race and gender that were beginning to shape the 2020 election. And so I was very open to what she was proposing. I certainly thought it was an idea that was overdue, but that felt very urgent for the reasons that Emily outlined. And so, we kept talking about it over that spring and into the summer. And by the time the fall came, I was ready to take that leap with Emily and the other 3 founding mothers that launched the 19th in January of 2020. And really, by the time I made that decision for myself, the risk felt not. The risk was not in not doing this, but the risk was in not doing it, not in, trying to start over, trying to do something new, because we really felt like that was the best and kind of most efficient way to change the narrative around how we discuss politics. I mean, women are the majority of the electorate, the majority of the population, and yet we continue to talk about women as a special interest group, or as if not, all issues are not women's issues. And so really reframing who voters are, and centering women not as a story but as the story is really what compelled me to start this journey.
Great, yeah, and it seems like it's been quite the journey so far. And Errin, I want to continue on that thought. So you were a national race writer for AP before coming to the 19th. And I'm wondering how that background for you and that founding level of reporting has influenced the way that you look at reporting at the 19th.
Yeah, well, it absolutely influences it because as editor at large, I wear a lot of hats, but in terms of the reporting hat that I wear and the journalism lens that I have, what working here means is that I really get to bring my lived experience as a Black woman, so the intersection of race and gender, to my storytelling as, again, the main story, and not like siloed into coverage that kind of goes alongside what has been kind of the mainstream media narrative, which as Emily alluded to, has been too white and too male for too long. So this first year, a lot of my focus was on Black women and their role in this democracy, their role in kind of shaping our politics, particularly democratic politics, and as among the coalition that would be the deciders of this election, right? And so, while I had covered race and politics in my previous role as race and ethnicity writer for the AP, which was really, honestly, before I came to the 19th, my dream job. It was a job that I'd wanted since I was an intern at the AP. But here, being able to center that coverage just felt very meaningful to me. I went into 2020 saying that race and gender would be the story of the 2020 election, and even before the pandemic, like, I believe that to be true, but it couldn't have been more true, after everything that we saw last year. And so being in a newsroom where there was, a recognition of that among all of us, and that we could say that with a unified voice instead of it being just me, kind of saying that as the race writer, or the, or a woman, on the team that was pointing these things out. I think that really is what kind of set our coverage apart and affirmed for me that this was the kind of work that I needed to be doing, not just in this moment, but really moving forward.
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, I think I can speak for a lot of reporters to say that when you're able to report from the entirety of your identity rather than just part of your identity, that's a really great feeling. And so it's really cool that the 19th has created a place for a lot of women to do that.
And not women, I just want to, one thing that's been really exciting about the 19th is that in the last year, we've been able also to sort of broaden our mission to say, actually women aren't the only people who are marginalized based on their gender. And so we've expanded our mission this year to say we're serving not just women of color, but also the LGBTQ community, which has been, I think, central to our work the last 6 months, and also has allowed us to think more broadly, honestly, about the concept of gender in our reporting. So sorry to cut you off, Ashley, just wanted to
no, don't worry about that. That was actually, a question that I was going to touch on later, but since we're on the topic, I've seen, quite a few reporters, even outside of the 19th, starting to focus more really on gender identity in their reporting and LGBTQ plus rights. I think in particular, Kate Sosin is someone that comes to mind when I think about that. And so I'm wondering what that process was like when you set out, the 19th with the asterisk. The asterisk was talking about everything that we have left. So was that something that you brought into your planning when you were looking at all of that, or what did that process look like for you all?
So I'll let Errin speak to the asterisk, which was her brilliant idea as we were trying to think about the branding and the name for the 19th. But I'll say, we knew always that look, I came into this very women-centric, right? Like my own lived experiences, my own privilege. And we got to the table and we knew we wanted to hire a journalist to cover LGBTQ issues. And we ended up hiring Kate, who's an extraordinary reporter and is one of the only openly trans non-binary reporters in the country. And Kate started pursuing storylines for us and really opened my eyes. I know Erin's a lot of our eyes in a lot of ways to, again, the ways in which people are marginalized based on their gender or their gender identity. And so, and of course, we dove into this coverage, and who knew? I mean, I guess you could have predicted that this, the trans girls in sports conversation would become another huge, the sort of 2.0 version of the bathroom bill that was hitting so many state legislatures around the country. So we've been covering those storylines. Suffrage is really important to us. And as we think about who has access to the polls and who doesn't, we started deeply covering the challenges facing trans voters who are, dealing with their IDs at the polls, and just realized very quickly that there was an enormous unserved audience there, and that the 19th was in a really great position to jump in. So it has been a transition for us and a learning curve, and I'm still very much on that learning path, but I think it's been important to our audience and to our staff. And Errin, you can speak to the asterisk, which was brilliant.
Yeah, well, I mean, let me just say, echo Emily's comments on, Kate's reporting has been a revelation for us as a newsroom, but I think also for this industry, to be honest, to be able to center that reporting in a mainstream journalism outlet is crucial, because it means exactly what my intent was in having the asterisk as part of our logo. So the asterisk, obviously, we are a newsroom that is named for the 19th Amendment, which guaranteed the right to vote for women, but not all women. And so the asterisk in our logo is a recognition of the omission of the Black women who were excluded from their access to the ballot at the ratification of the 19th Amendment in 1920. And so, we put that there as a reminder of that, but also as for us to be thinking always about, who the story is, who the storytellers are, but also who remains unseen and unheard in this democracy. And increasingly what we began to realize was that LGBTQ folks were part of that unseen and unheard electorate, or even people who may not even be particularly politically involved, but who absolutely understand the consequences of politics on their daily realities, right? And so, I will just say that for me, so much of what Kate's reporting has helped me to understand is the ways in which this country continues to reckon with who gets to be out in public. Like where is it okay for people to be gay and to be queer in this country? that is the fight that we are having, and they are doing such a good job of laying out what that fight is for our audience.
Yeah, and I mean, as someone who has also reported a lot on different topics relating to women's issues and gender minority issues, something that I've thought about a lot is that there's kind of been a recent push to get more women reporters, first of all, with bylines, and also just to have more reporting centered around women. And so when I think about a lot of the historical events, I guess, that have happened in the past, I think about the voices that may have been left out. And Errin, you were just touching on that with LGBTQ voices largely being left out of the media. So I'm wondering if in your reporting or if in Founding the 19th, you've thought about events in the past and what stories might have been had we had more women or LGBTQ reporters on the scene.
Well, you know what I think a lot about, Ashley, since coming to this role, again, prior to coming here, most of my journalism had been focused on issues of race and the intersection of race and a lot of different aspects of our society. But, when I came to the 19th, I did begin to think much more deeply and really for the first time about what it meant to be a woman in this country. I thought a lot, both personally and professionally, about what it meant to be a Black person before, but now I think a lot more about what it means to be Black and female, and how that intersection informs, people's agency and also my journalism. So yeah, I mean, I think what also feels kind of lost to me in what, I guess, kind of pining for what could have been or what should have been, in the time before this newsroom existed, is just just normalizing women as voters and full participants in this society, in this democracy, right? Like who we talk about when we talk about rural folks in this country, or blue collar folks, or Midwesterners, or what, the default setting for so many things has been white and male. And what does it mean to just, not silo women or women's coverage or women's issues, but just to fully integrate them into the conversation that we are having, and the journalism that we are doing. Like that is the thing that I wish had happened before, because it erases folks, it erases women to only discuss them in certain ways. It diminishes their agency, it diminishes their citizenship, it diminishes who, what their role is in this country, in ways that I think the pandemic has kind of helped us to see in a lot of ways. But I think working in this newsroom has certainly helped me to see in a more urgent way.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of questions, I think, that are still there about what could have been. But I think, how you answered that question, Errin, it makes me think of maybe a future in which newsrooms like the 19th are not needed. And that doesn't mean I want to put you out of business at all. I think that it's amazing.
We just got in business.
Yeah, you just got in business, right? But it was for a reason. It was because there was a lack of coverage of the things that you've already mentioned. And so, is your ideal future a place where every newsroom is like the 19th in their area of coverage? Or, I mean, what do we think the future is looking like for gender reporting? And I'm not trying to put you out of business.
No, no, we're not going anywhere. But no. What we are doing is trying to put other newsrooms on notice, mm-hmm. that gender and race must be. We just have to do this differently in our industry, because we know the potential for journalism to influence national conversation, to influence national thought around a range of issues, but especially around issues of gender. And so, why wouldn't there be more women and more, in newsrooms when we are more than half the population of this country? That's just that is, you talk about having newsrooms that are reflective of who we are as a society. Like if you don't have, if at least half your newsroom is not women, like you're not reflecting your society. If you don't have journalists of color working in your newsroom, like, are you really reflecting society or your community? And how can those communities expect you to really understand or trust them? So, I mean, it's frankly an economic imperative for newsrooms to do better around these issues, if not just a moral one.
The only thing I'd add to that is we're also trying to pressure the industry to do better when it comes to how you treat your journalists, the people who work in your organization. I mean, I think what we found all too often is that we know that women are the majority of graduates from journalism schools. They're the majority entering the field, but when they get into their 30s and their 40s and they're faced with the pressures of a small child at home and elderly parents and that sandwich generation that hits women, and in particular women of color, the hardest, particularly when it comes to caregiving, you see those journalists step out of those news operations. And I think so for us, it's things like offering 6 months of fully paid family leave for everyone on our team, 4 months of fully paid caregiver leave, so you can take care of your mom or your dad, when they're on their deathbed, or an elderly relative, or a child who is sick. We offered some caregiving stipends for our members of our team during COVID in order to truly get to launch. We cover 100% of our employees' healthcare premiums. We're trying to take all of those obstacles out of the way, off the table, to say, what does the pipeline of women journalists, of LGBTQ journalists, of journalists of color look like when you take all of those barriers out of the way, and give them the opportunity to advance to the highest levels of newsroom leadership. So there is an element of peer pressure in what we're up to as well.
And live where you need to live to do this work, which also benefits our newsroom, because you then have reporters who are actually out in the wild where actual real people live, right? Like not all, based in Washington, D.C. Nothing against Washington. There are many lovely Americans that live in Washington, but there are also Americans that live in
my hometown. So
exactly. So the idea that we wouldn't cover them, or that we're not in those communities as well. When you have journalists who are based in those places, what they are seeing only makes our coverage stronger, because they're able to contribute from the ground, from those types of places on a regular basis.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I mean, I know that we've been seeing, at least in DC, kind of an exodus of some reporters who are going to a place where maybe they can afford to pay rent while they're able to watch a Senate hearing on Zoom and things like that. And so I think
but also that political journalism, like those datelines are no less valuable. And that is the thing that we need people to understand.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's a pretty obvious statement that the COVID-19 pandemic has changed a lot about the way that we live and the way that we work. But I also know that the 19th started months before the pandemic started. And so something that I was honestly a little bit nervous about when I heard that all this was happening, I was like, oh no, are they going to be able to make it through the pandemic that has been just, gutting a lot of other industries and news in particular? There's been a lot of layoffs. So maybe Emily, you can speak to this. First of all, you got through it, but I'm sure it was nerve-wracking at the beginning. But what was that like, starting a news organization in the midst of all that chaos?
So it was the hardest thing any of us have ever done. Let's start there. I mean, I think, we announced that we were going to launch the 19th in January of 2020. And we were, fundraising. I was out sort of fundraising, pounding the pavement like crazy to try to make it go. We were raising something like $700,000 a month toward our goal. Then the pandemic hits. Like March and April, our fundraising dropped to basically $37,000 over the course of those months. Like it was perilous. Were we going to be able to do this or not? And there was one week for me where my husband had COVID and I had a whole bunch of really big fundraising calls, and I had my 4-year-old in my lap, and I was like, just literally like trying to there were so many tears shed over the course of the winter. And like we were safe and we were healthy and we were blessed to like have all of these resources at our disposal. So I don't want to downplay it all. I mean, our experience compared to so many others was a walk in the park. But it was a scary time to launch a startup for sure. And a couple of our early funders, we went to them and basically said, we think we can do this. Can you give us a security blanket? Can you give us, another $500,000? We had pledged to our team that we would always work to have close to 18 months of runway in the bank so that we would not be one of these news organizations that launched with a big splash and then was laying people off within a handful of months, especially when you're telling, women, LGBTQ people from marginalized backgrounds to leave their safe jobs and come to your startup. We had made a pledge to them. And so these early funders did come back to the table, gave us that security blanket, allowed us to hire the team we needed, allowed us to launch slightly on a skeleton crew, but close, in August. And it just was like miraculous. I mean, in many ways, the 19th was needed in this moment, especially because of the ways that marginalized people were hit hardest by this pandemic. We had this, our version of your festival, we had a sort of launch summit called the 19th Represents. It was all virtual in August. It was supposed to be in person. We were super excited about it. We hoped like maybe we'd have 500 people in the room and a couple of big name speakers. When we took it virtual, suddenly, Errin got the first sit down interview with Kamala Harris as the VP nominee. And we had Hillary Clinton and we had Melinda Gates, Elise Stefanik, Stacey Abrams. The New York Philharmonic Orchestra performed via Zoom. The Go-Go's got back together to perform. And then Meghan the Duchess of Sussex, reached out and said she'd heard what we were doing and she wanted to be engaged. And suddenly we didn't have 500 people in a museum ballroom. We had, almost 200,000 people. And so it's just been a crazy and magical and wild ride since then. But I would be lying if I said there weren't a lot of tears shed along the way and a lot of fears that, we might even have to wait a whole year. So.
Yeah, and I would just add to that. I mean, look, Emily shielded so many of us from so much of that fear because of, just what she was able to do and her commitment to making sure that folks didn't have to worry about whether they were going to have a job, but just how we were going to do this differently once the pandemic hit, right? Because, I mean, you're a politics reporter, like 2020 was supposed to be our Super Bowl. Like this was it, right? Like everybody was ready to hit the campaign trail and, cover the hell out of this. I mean, you had, Klobuchar was on the ticket, like, it was a big year for us, right?
It really was.
We're in Iowa, we're in New Hampshire, momentum was happening. Then we go to South Carolina and then, lockdown happens and the campaign trail virtually disappears under our feet. And all of us were just kind of looking at each other like, well, what the hell are we supposed to do now? There's no campaign. Like, what does that mean? Like for a political journalist, right? But again, because Emily was just like, let's figure out what we need to do next. You all have jobs, you all have healthcare. Don't worry about that. Like, let's figure this out. And what became obvious to us very quickly was that even as women were not dying, and being killed by coronavirus in disproportionate numbers in almost every other aspect of this, from an economic perspective in particular, women were being disproportionately impacted by and responding to the pandemic. And so we said, you know what, this is what we're going to we're going to double down on this, and we are going to focus on leaving an accurate record behind of how women are being hit by this thing. And that was something that felt just as urgent for me as a politics reporter. It felt just as urgent for our members and readers who needed information and who needed to not feel like whatever they were going through, they knew that they weren't going through that stuff in isolation because it was happening to women and marginalized folks across the country. Like, it just really felt like, as a newsroom, that we were at the intersection of everything. And so for me, I think that the pandemic just affirmed the need for the 19th existence, right? Because you got to see the daily realities that the policies that we enact as a country really speak to, but also the people that are being impacted by those policies and what showing up for them and doing this for them felt very much like our best and highest calling in that moment.
Yeah, it almost seemed as though the pandemic was the perfect storm, I guess, for an organization like the 19th to emerge, because there were so many important, I mean, I don't want to frame it as a good thing, but it was good that you were there and that you were around and ready to have coverage of all of those really important topics. Yes. Another big political story, I guess you could call it, has been, especially in 2020, a surge of white nationalism,
Sure.
also a surge of, I guess we could call it misogyny. I don't know if that's the right term, of like a surge of misogyny, but it seems as though women have been, both online, in politics, in normal life, have been, it seems, more targeted than they have in the past. I think there's a lot of different forces that are working to make that happen, especially as we think of the shootings that have gone on recently in Atlanta in particular. And so I'm wondering if, when your team is reporting on those stories, is there an effort to frame them around the women who are involved, or are you trying to kind of go after the more sinister forces that are underneath? Like, is every story in your mind supposed to be centered around a woman or a group of women or a group of LGBTQ people, or is there more flexibility for that when you're reporting these stories?
I mean, look, gender includes men. Like, we certainly wrote about the toxic masculinity that we have seen emerging as women continue to gain power and influence in this country, even as women are feeling and being, even more unsafe in this country, right? And so yeah, that is absolutely part of the conversation, and it's been part of the coverage that we've had here at the 19th. Emily, I don't know what you want to add to that, but that's my short answer.
I was just going to say, our reporter Amanda Becker's work on the Lincoln Project, her investigations in the Lincoln Project, are a really terrific example of that. Like, I would say the bulk of our journalism aims to center women in the LGBTQ community. Like, those are the voices we are aiming to elevate. We want people to see themselves reflected in our journalism, people who are not used to seeing people like them as the sort of center or the lead anecdote of stories. But as Errin said, like, gender means everybody. And I think we have just as deep of an obligation to cover the ways that men are using their power inappropriately to hold back or hold down women and members of the LGBTQ community.
Mm-hmm. And
or when they're doing the right thing by women or LGBTQ.
Allyship.
Right.
Exactly.
We love allyship. And, when you're reporting on these topics, like I said, they're a little bit darker, are a little bit controversial, at least to many men in our country. Women tend to face a lot more backlash online, it seems, than men do. And, there's examples of doxing, of sharing people's personal home addresses or photos of their family, scary things like that it seems as though women need to face or end up facing more than men do online. At least that's the visibility. And so I'm sure that's something that you all have thought of. And I'm wondering what you do to try to prevent that, or how you're able to support your staff through those moments.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think, first of all, there's some things I'm happy to talk about, and there's some things I'm not going to talk about just for the sake of the security issues that we're talking about right here. Right. But I will tell you, I never thought launching a new newsroom that I'd have to be really thoughtful about, like, does our office have a listed address? Do we, I think as a group of a team that's largely women and that includes members of the LGBTQ community, like, we have had to be hyper thoughtful and vigilant about the safety of our team, both in person and also online. Social media is a cesspool. All of you are aware of that. Like, it's some place we have to engage professionally and with our stories, but it's also a totally frightening place. Whether it was Amanda Becker's coverage, around the Lincoln Project, where she, faced just an enormous amount of it, to, our reporter Kate Sasson, who, when you wade into the transgender sports battle, there's a lot of horrific stuff. We try to take really good care of our team when things like that explode and we're watching people's mentions fill up on social media with horrific stuff. We get them out of the conversation. We have them turn off their social media. We have other people on our team sign up for shifts to monitor and report the scary stuff that we see. But it is, look, I spent the last 11 years at a Texas-based news organization and got my fair share of it. This is like nothing I have ever seen before. And once you move into the gender space, it's like everybody, every angry white nationalist feels like they've got your number and that they can, they or the bots who are created in their model are coming after you. So it's, Errin, you can probably speak to this from a race standpoint too.
Yeah, look, to spend your career covering race means that your inbox has been a dumpster fire for a long time, unfortunately. And so, by the time I came to covering the intersection of race and politics, like, I was unfortunately accustomed to a lot of the vitriol that I was getting for stories that I was writing, whether, they were overtly race related or not, So, but what is, what I certainly appreciate here is being in a newsroom where there is such a proactive approach to the understanding that women and marginalized people are more targeted, especially online. And so having, whether it's having trainings for us as a newsroom or, having security protections that are more, like I said, proactive than waiting for something to come up as a problem, but also just encouraging employees that this is, while this may be par for the course, that doesn't mean that it's unacceptable. And that doesn't mean that we should not speak up when it is happening to one of us, as opposed to just kind of saying, oh, this comes with the job. Let me just try to move on and keep going. It's like, no, like raise your hand and say if something, if something is alarming to you, if you do feel like, you would like for somebody to look into something. Like, this is a place where I think all of us feel comfortable knowing that we can and should do that instead of just kind of accepting it as how things are in our industry.
Yeah. And I mean, if you are a woman or an LGBTQ person reporting on this type of thing, it's really important to have that support network. And I think
because it's not okay.
Yeah, exactly. And I also want to touch on, we'll move to a little bit happier topics after this question, but while we're here, I think one thing especially that came up during the coverage of a lot of the protests that were going on last June around the killing of George Floyd, there were some news organizations that would bar certain reporters from covering certain things because of the bias that they may have had against the issue. And more recently, in particular, I don't know if any of our viewers are aware of this, but a reporter at the Washington Post named Felicia Sonmez was barred from covering stories that involved sexual assault for a certain amount of time. She's not anymore, they got it resolved, but for a certain amount of time, she was barred from doing that because of the inherent bias that she may have towards the situation, because she herself was a survivor of assault. And so this is just kind of a narrative that has been common on social media and surrounding the news. And I'm wondering, since you are an organization of mostly women, covering mostly women, how does that conversation come into play when you're talking about these things?
I mean, I'll speak to this and then Errin can jump in, but we believe deeply that our journalists should bring their lived experiences to the work, and that the work is indeed better because they are bringing their lived experiences to the work. So, this is a newsroom where we encourage folks to bring their truth. And our journalism, our journalism is rigorous. Our reporters are professionals. It goes through editing, layers of editing. I mean, we trust them to do extraordinary work. This idea of quote unquote bias, everybody, these questions of objectivity, everybody's bringing something to the table. There's nobody who is coming to a newsroom without a lived experience. Whether they're a white man or whether they're a white woman or whether they're a Black woman. So we think about these things a lot, but I think the other thing that it requires, candidly, is also an environment where you take care of the people who are on your team. And you say to someone, boy, you're a Black woman, you have been in the midst of covering this Derek Chauvin trial. How are you feeling? Do you need a break? What can we provide for you? Do you need mental health services? Is there anything that we can provide to help make this? I mean, remember, when you allow and encourage people to bring their full lived experiences to the work, you are also putting them in a position of grappling with things that can be really triggering and really difficult. Errin, again, I'm a white woman sitting here telling you this, but Errin can speak to this more directly, but I think we don't have any rules like that. And indeed, I actually think people's lived experiences make them better at covering those sensitive topics.
Mm-hmm.
My CEO is what she said, basically. Seriously, to work in a newsroom where my lived experience is seen as an asset and not a liability, frankly, is empowering for me as a journalist. And, you brought up a couple of examples. Actually, I am in solidarity with my Asian American sisters who are in journalism, who were told that, well, I don't know if they should be covering, the mass shootings in Atlanta because they may not be able to be objective. It's like, hello, these are the main people you need on the ground covering that story, because they understand what's going on here, and they are living the anti-Asian violence that has been happening in this country for the better part of a year, and even before that, knowing the context, the history of that. Like, why wouldn't you want those reporters, make these stories stronger? And so that is certainly our assertion at the 19th, and continuing to kind of push back against that argument. I think is important for us as an industry, for those of us who know that is bunk, basically, and that, just the notion of objectivity, period. I mean, it's easy for objectivity to be your default setting when you're a white man.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think as the leadership of newsrooms hopefully change to reflect a more diverse America, in general, maybe we'll get a little bit less of that and a little bit more acceptance of, your lived experience can color and contextualize the reporting that you do every day. So
it's generational too. Like this actually isn't just about race. This is in many ways about generation. And I do think the younger generation of journalists coming up in newsrooms are far more direct about the fact that those lived experiences are assets and not detriments.
Mm-hmm.
And there's more of them, frankly, than there were when when I was coming up, or even the generation before me, because I mean, certainly, at least along racial lines, it is not as if, journalists of color have not been calling for changes, especially, in newsrooms. You talk about the national reckoning on race, but journalism has not been immune from that conversation. And, you go back to the Kerner Commission in 1968, like, we know what needs to change here in these newsrooms around diversity. And yet, now that I think that there is a critical mass, this latest kind of generation that is pushing for change, there are many more of them that are able to speak, and there is something to the idea of strength in numbers, I think, too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. So I'm getting a lot of Q&A questions coming at you, but just selfishly, I have one more to ask myself. So as a female reporter who has reported quite a bit on women's issues, I have never had a full team of all women or all gender minorities. And that's not to say that my male colleagues are terrible or anything. I've had amazing male colleagues. And I don't want to make it sound like that. But for me personally, I just want to know, what is it like to work on a team of all women and LGBTQ people? It sounds great to me. What is that like?
Well, I'll start by saying we have both skincare and interior design Slack channels, which are fantastic. Honestly, it's really special. And we, by the way, we have a man on our team. Our CFO is an incredible guy named Jeff Dean. We would not be here without him, and he is supported. The reason we're here is because Jeff supports this work, but it's a lot of fun. The happy hours are really fun. The conversations are really rollicking. It's the first place I've worked where people feel comfortable, sharing everything from menopause to miscarriages in our Slack channels, and doing it in a way that is exceedingly supportive. People don't feel scared to have those conversations. Those are conversations you would have felt super awkward talking about in virtually any environment I've ever worked in. I might be judged for this. They might think maybe I'm not cut out for this work. We talk about mental health a lot, which is another thing I think people have been really scared to talk about in other work settings. And we have really, I think, tried to normalize. It's pretty great. Errin, any thoughts from you?
Yeah, honestly, Ashley, I will tell you the best part about working in this environment is I get to talk about politics with smart women all day.
Mm-hmm.
Like, the politics teams that I've been on previously were mostly male. And I'm not saying that you can't have conversations with men about politics, but it is a different dynamic. Nobody is trying to prove how smart they are all the time. Everybody is smart. Everybody knows what's going on, and everybody is sharing without interrupting or talking over each other. Like, it is very refreshing, and I just really appreciate that, because it's not an experience that, it's something that before was kind of relegated to the group text of your colleagues, your women colleagues, maybe in different newsrooms across the country about politics, but to be in a newsroom where all of us get to talk about all of these things together, and it is not a white male voice that is dominating or driving that conversation. Like that feels very different indeed.
Sounds
Or that there's a
wonderful.
collective recognition of a problematic headline or a problematic storyline. And it's like, oh, okay, so I don't have to, it's not just me. I'm not just wondering that, like to be affirmed. It's a very affirming place.
That's great. That's great. All right, so I kind of went into how much time I wanted to reserve for a Q&A, but I had so many questions. So I'm going to go to one from Glenn Miller, who says, what are your growth plans for the future? Will you be, or are you already covering women's issues internationally?
Glenn, great question. So we are in a position, a lucky position, we think, to nearly double the size of our newsroom over the next year. And what that means for us is expansions into things like coverage of gender and climate, coverage of caregiving. I think we're going to be probably one of the first, if not the first, national news organization with a full-time caregiving beat. We're going to be hiring a reporter at the intersection of women, girls, and disparities in public education. Working around the clock to expand not just our journalism, but also the reach of our journalism. So we give all of our journalism away for free to every newsroom in the country. It's not just available on our platforms. Anybody can republish it. And, hundreds of newspapers do. So we have partnerships with Univision to translate our work into Spanish. We have partnerships with all of the Gatehouse newspapers, the USA Today network. So we're hoping to expand on those in the coming year. And we have a lot of events. If you check out our website, we have a ton of upcoming events. We do a lot of sort of both 1 hour events, virtual events, half-day summits that are topical, and our big summit in the summer, which is a really big deal for us. So more. I think we're focused domestically in a really big way. Obviously, international is a whole new can of worms and would be an enormous expansion for an organization of ours. So not anytime soon, but I would say, never say never.
Great. And a question from Jim Proman. How do you cover the right-wing women in Congress like Marjorie Taylor Greene and Michelle Fischbach?
Errin, you want to speak to that?
Yeah, right. Look, we at the 19th, we are trying to be a home for everybody, whether they want to live here or not, right? And these are women in power. We know that, there were a record of Republican women that were elected in November, alongside the Democratic victories, right? So the idea that we wouldn't cover Republican women who are making news, of course we're going to cover them, even if they are, to the extreme examples of the Republican Party, like these are newsmakers, and so we have an obligation to report on them as they are making news.
But I'd say that we do that without fear or favor. And I think one thing that's important about the 19th is that, we actually changed our mission statement this year. We used to call ourselves a nonprofit, nonpartisan newsroom, and now we call ourselves an independent nonprofit newsroom. And we made that switch because we felt that the term nonpartisan had in some ways become sort of co-opted to mean, both sidesism or equal time for equal sides. And at the end of the day, at the 19th, we stand for fact, and we stand for evidence, and we stand for science. And those are the things that drive our journalism. And so from that standpoint, we don't give people unfettered access to our stories or to our platforms or to our events to spew misinformation or disinformation. And so we're pretty rigid. Again, we cover everyone across the ideological spectrum, but we don't allow people to go unchallenged, and we do our damnedest not to publish anything that could be considered a lie or misinformation.
Exactly. At the end of the day, it's about honesty and accuracy and leaving behind an honest and accurate record. And so, as they are part of the political landscape, certainly they may factor into that, but the truth, which is, what all of us as journalists are in pursuit of is absolutely at the center of that coverage for us.
Got it. And let's see, if we have time for, I think, one more, I'm going to go to Dawn Tubison, who asks, when you interview folks, do you feel they are more or less trusting of you because you are a woman?
Errin, I don't do much interviewing these days. When you interview women, I think yes.
Dawn, that's an interesting question. I don't feel that there is necessarily a skepticism or that people think that I have an agenda if I'm interviewing them and they are not a woman. But for the women that we interview, and especially the marginalized folks and women that we interview, like they are excited. They've heard of the 19th. They understand what we are about. Maybe they've read some of our stories, and they feel like they are going to be heard and seen in a way that maybe they have not been before, which is really gratifying to know, right? Because that is what we are attempting to do here, is to amplify those voices and to show and prove that we are a publication that can be trusted with their stories, because we recognize that they are valuable and that they are worth being out in the world. That being said, to the extent I quote men less often, but when I do not feel like there is, just kind of a skepticism or a belief that they won't be treated fairly here. I don't get that at all.
Hey, Ashley, can I answer one more half of a different question really fast?
Sure.
All right. I saw a question that says, how can we support the 19th? And my answer to that is going to be, the first thing you should do is support your local media. So MinnPost is incredible. We are huge fans. Errin and I were already texting about half an hour ago about how we were going to make a donation. So start there. And if you have $19 left over, we would love it if you'd support the 19th at 19thnews.org.
Yes. And
Thanks
please subscribe to our newsletter, which is free every day, and on Fridays you get a bonus newsletter. So it is yes, we appreciate all support, whether it is financial. If it is not able to be financial, we understand that too. Every share, every mention that you can give of our newsroom and what we're doing, that all helps, and we are grateful for all of it.
Well, spoken like true panelists that have absolutely done this before. Yeah, I mean, it's really important to support local news, as I say, as a, kind of local news reporter, Washington reporter for a local news agency. We appreciate everything that we can get and share that with the 19th. So with that, we are a little bit over time. So I am going to, first of all, thank you ladies so much. This was an amazing conversation, and I really hope that all of our viewers got something out of it. And I'm going to turn it over to Tanner Curl to send us out.
Yes, thank you so much. This was a great conversation. Thanks to all three of you. We'll continue the Love-a-thon, support the 19th, support MinnPost. All of these organizations are really, really vital to our democracy at the local and national level. So thank you so much. I also want to give a quick thanks to our festival sponsors. I'll take a deep breath, try and get through this as quick as I can. AT&T, Polad Company, Shavlik Family Foundation, Baird Private Wealth Management, Comcast Twin Cities, Frederickson and Byron, PA, the Westminster Town Hall Forum, Citizens League, Darla Cashin at RBC Wealth Management, the Hubbard School of Journalism and Mass Communication at the University of Minnesota, the Humphrey School of Public Affairs at the University of Minnesota, and the Minneapolis-St. Paul International Film Festival. And of course, to all of our VIP supporters, our donors, thank you all for being a part of the festival and our work. And I'll end by saying thank you again to Emily and Errin for joining us and for the important work you do. We're honored to be in the nonprofit news sphere with you.
Well, long live MinnPost, and congratulations on the MinnPost Festival.
Oh, thank you so
Thank
much.
you so much for including us. So fun.
Great. Thanks, everyone. Thanks for joining us this week, and have a good weekend.
Take care. Stay safe.
Everyone, thank you.
Bye.